good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. We're so happy to have you join for this exclusive tour of CWRU's Putnam collection. We're excited to bring this virtual tour to you, and hopefully we'll do some more. There's nearly 60 pieces in the collection, and we're just going to scratch the surface with 8 of them tonight. So we would love to have you join us for future of this series, future episodes of this series. And I'd like to first introduce myself. My name is Chris Reiber. I am the Assistant Director of Chapter and Regional Programming for the Alumni Association here at Case Western Reserve University. And a big long title basically means that I work with our alumni chapters around the country. And so this particular event was thought up by one of our alumni in upstate New York, Richard Bloom, who is here with us this evening. He and I have been working together to continue to engage alumni in and around the upstate New York area. But that's not to say that you can't engage with your alumni chapter wherever you happen to be. We have Cleveland, Seattle, Chicago, Detroit, Phoenix, Arizona, San Diego, California, everywhere in between, all over the country, as well as some international chapters. So I'd encourage you, if you've not already, please engage with your alumni chapter. You can head to case.edu/alumni/chapters, and you'll be able to see the different events that we put on, connect with your chapter leaders. So a couple of quick housekeeping items before I introduce our speakers this evening. Everyone has been muted by default. I would encourage you to utilize the chat feature. If you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to do so at any time, and I will try to filter those out to our speakers as often as I'm able to get those questions answered. And I would encourage you also to have the video up. We'd love to be able to see your smiling faces as we go through, so please do that as well. We have 2 of my teammates are also working with us today. Tiana Ellington and Crystal Crosby also work with me at the Alumni Association, and they're going to be our film feet on the ground, as it were, filming the different sculptures for us. And then we have our 2 guests, our speakers. First is JP Peralta. JP is an alumnus of the class of 2019. And he had studied art history and theater. And he and I first met actually when he was a recipient of the Alumni Association's license plate program. Because of his passion for the art sculptures on campus, he actually ended up being a recipient for our scholarship from the Alumni Association. So welcome, JP.
Thank you. Some of you guys who are here, exactly one of you may remember me from being the recipient of a fellowship at this museum that may or may not be in your namesake. But I appreciate Chris having me on. I'm very excited for this. It's been a while since I've been connected with Case's Sculptures, because I've since moved on. I've since flown the coop, so I'm excited to get back into it.
And ironically, JP, you're now in Rochester now, right?
I am. By pure coincidence, I've ended up in Rochester, New York as a school teacher, as an arts teacher, no less.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, JP.
Of course, my pleasure.
Also tonight, we have the director of the Putnam Collection, Kathy Berry.
Hello.
And thank you so much, Kathy, for joining us. We're really excited to hear your insights and hear from you about this wonderful collection that CWRU has on its campus.
I am delighted to talk about it, either in person or by foot soon. So thank you.
Absolutely.
And such a pleasure to be joined by JP, who, while he was a student, evidenced such passion, real passion about some of these pieces. And it's just great to see where you've gone, JP, and we're going to keep tabs on you. So
likewise. I could never keep too close of an eye on you, Kathy.
Okay.
All right. Well, without further delay, I'll pass it over to JP and Kathy. And where better place to start than start?
Absolutely. So, so the first piece we're going to start with today is a piece called Start by an artist named David E. Davis. And again, coincidentally, I'm all about coincidences, apparently. David E. Davis was the founder of an organization called the Sculpture Center, which is in Cleveland, right on East, what would it be? 123rd, I think. East 123rd in Euclid. It's a gallery right there. So I, by pure coincidence, ended up being a work study student at the Sculpture Center while I was a student. And David Davis is a really, really strong contemporary abstract artist. I'm sorry, again, I'm hearkening to my job now as a school teacher for K through 6. So abstract means non-representational, or it doesn't create a picture. And contemporary means it was made by an artist who's alive today. David Davis is no longer alive, but when the piece was purchased and when the piece was commissioned, he was a living artist who was working for that. It was not bought as a single piece. So I guess I'll start off with a little bit of a controversial statement. Start is referred to by many current students by a pseudonym, maybe I'll say. It feels like a fitting way to describe it. It's called the Ugly Statue, which I think is entirely unfounded, entirely untrue. I have great reverence for David Davis's pieces. It was the third piece acquired by the Putnam collection. And the way I would describe Start is as architectonic. A little $5 word for you. Architectonic means a piece of sculpture and architecture. It's a marriage of the two things, right? So it functions both as a pure sculpture, but it also has an architectural aspect to it because of its scale, especially. It's in the form of an arch, as you can quite plainly tell, right? And as I mentioned before, it's called the Ugly Statue, right? And I think it's really interesting. This is a really, really challenging piece of art, especially considering its location. Currently, it is right at the entrance of the freshman dorms, right? So it's a very distinctive meeting place. I remember freshman year for me, which was in 2015, it was always be like meet at the statue, meet at the statue, meet at the statue to get picked up for this and that, fraternity rushing, all these different things. It's a really, really solid landmark that's used for freshman orientation. But for David Davis, Start was really a visual representation of the new experiences that these new collegiate students would be having. I think Davis has a really clever use of composition, color, and also size, which are three aspects of an artwork that I think are often taken for granted: color, composition, and size. The viewers, I believe, or at least for me, starts at this really strong pop of red, which on the screen is at the bottom to the right. There's a really strong pop of red, which is the only time this red appears. And then it kind of travels up through this long yellow archway, up and over, and then down through this like almost Damascus silver finish. I think it's really clever the way it moves from like warm saturated colors through to cool colors, or vice versa. Maybe it starts on the silver for you and moves over to the warm red. I think that transition of colors is really, really clever. And it also starts or ends, depending again on how you look at it, at the widest and then moves to the narrowest, or at the narrowest and moves to the widest. There's just like a really nice progression in this piece. Now, you may have noticed I'm looking off to the side. I do have something written down for you, so forgive me. I like to be extemporaneous, but in some cases, you do need to represent the artists and the voices that are involved in the establishment of an artwork. So I will be reading some of this. Forgive me. I know if you've ever attended an art talk, it's nothing new, right? So Start begs to be unfolded and righted. Its conspicuous presence on a busy thoroughfare invites viewers to project their own imaginary ideas of the forms coming together and organizing themselves by color and by size. Knowing the precise measurements of elements in Davis's work often reveals the system of harmonious relationships he developed during his prolific career. Now, I'm lucky to be able to spend a lot of time studying David Davis, having worked at the Sculpture Center. because, again, he founded it. He had a lot of his own sculptures. The Davide Davis Gallery is adjacent to the Sculpture Center. So if you are interested in seeing more of his work, I believe it's still there. It's kept at East 123rd and Euclid again. But he was really big on this idea that I don't want to say pioneered, but certainly that he embraced, called the harmonic grid is what he called it, right? Sorry, I bumped my microphone. The harmonic grid is a rectangle whose sides are related by a proportion of 3:1. And on that rectangle, he inscribes triangles and circles and all these other squares. And then his sculpture tends to cut, perforate, fold, and rearrange these forms that are arranged and imagined on this 3:1 rectangle, right? And he ends up creating these super complex interlaced geometric forms. He plays with negative space and thickness. He constructs complicated but aesthetically harmonious pieces. Now, Star is a little bit different. It doesn't have that same 3:1 relationship between all of its different elements, but it is still a mid-career piece for him that is drawing on this idea of how important are the proportion of elements to one another between the base on the right side or left side, as you see it on the screen now, versus the base on the right side. And one of the really good resonances that I feel with this piece is with music. I think that music similarly is composed and produced with pertinence to harmonious relationships, right? Like it's just sound waves vibrating, and the relationship of these sound waves from one to another is really either harmonious or dissonant. And I think that in particular gives Davis's sculpture, I think, a lot of resonance for anyone who has familiarity with music. Again, music is composed within a system that defines the proportional relationships between notes within a given piece based off only 3 major structural components: rhythm, melody, and harmony. Similarly, Davis's work is composed of a system that defines the proportional relationships among the visual elements within a given piece based on 3 major structural components: the rectangle, triangle, and circle. Now, there's a scholar named Henning who notes that Davis's work within the harmonic grid tends to behave like a language, saying it is based on a rationally conceived system, which yet allows for an almost infinite variety of forms, much like music, of course. And then the colors that he chooses are solutions to formal problems that arise with the final construction. I really think that Davis's use of color is super fascinating because it's not necessarily emotional inherently. A lot of the times that you see color, especially in 2D media like paintings or drawings, color is an emotional choice. It's an evocative choice. But for Davis, he used color as a way to solve formal problems. Formal meaning problems with the form, with the shape, with the construction. So you'll notice we have one really conspicuous, perhaps, red piece on the base. And that's because that piece is way thicker than everything else. It has a ton of negative space. It has a perfect circle involved in it, right? But he uses this red to draw out those contrasts even more and lets the silver and the gold interplay between one another to create just this really nice harmony. It's like if you're familiar with music, it's like a seventh, right? Or like a really dissonant note that really spices things up. Adding that red in there is beautiful. I would like to address a quote from Davis. So he advocates the understanding of the visual syntax of his sculpture before making critical evaluations, which I'm sure is something that all artists would love, is everyone to understand where this is coming from before making a critical evaluation. Of course, that never really happens. But Pablo Picasso says, "I cannot speak a word of Chinese, but I would be a fool to deny the existence of the Chinese language," which was something that Davis embraced and talked about a lot. He's like, look, I have a visual syntax. I have a visual language that's really important to me and is really important for understanding my work. So to pretend like that doesn't exist or to evaluate it without recognizing that is a little bit hasty. Davis continues to say that making premature judgments without understanding his language is tantamount to critically analyzing Anna Karenina in Russian, applying only your understanding of the English syntax and alphabet. Now, while Start is not categorically a harmonic grid piece from his oeuvre, it does reflect many of the mathematical characteristics present in Harmonic Grid pieces that don't necessarily occur in other series, making Start an interesting intersection of many of his ideas. In terms of its relationship to Case's campus, this archway has really become, as I mentioned, a symbol of the North Residential Village and the freshman dorms for so many people in so many ways recently. But interestingly, Start was not always installed at this exact location as you see it right now at the opening. Is that on Juniper? Is that the name of that street, or Mistletoe? It's Juniper, right?
Juniper, yep.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't know it when I was going there. I'm not gonna pretend that time away from campus has taken the name of that street away from me. I never knew it. But it wasn't always placed right here at the entrance to the freshman dorms. Before, Start used to be located at Ford and Bellflower, where MSAS is, or the Mendel School of Applied Social Sciences, I believe. That's the whole name, right? It used to be at the Mendel building, kind of near where, like, on a path that led to the Mather Memorial Building. And Start was right over that path, but it held the same idea, right? You are entering underneath it, especially in your early years. You remember entering underneath this huge architectonic sculpture, right? And maybe I'll probably close here by mentioning a couple of quotes here from a letter from the artist to the curator of the Putnam collection at the time. And for context, the Putnam collection, which Kathy is in charge of now, is the name of the collection of sculpture at Case. And if I'm not mistaken, it was based on the sculpture collection at Princeton, which, if you've ever been to Princeton, has a really, really robust who's who of outdoor sculpture. Case modeled their public sculpture program in many ways. Harvey Buchanan, who I'll read, who David E. Davis was writing this letter to, modeled a lot of Case's public sculpture program off of Princeton's. But Case did their own thing with it. They didn't sit there and say, oh, Princeton had this, I want this piece. Case said, we want these pieces, we want these artists, we want to embrace the same sort of thing that Princeton's doing. And they've developed their own really unique and really special methodology of curation that's allowed for the Putnam collection to be as strong as it is. But David Davis writes this in a letter to Harvey Buchanan, the director of the Putnam collection at the time, and it gives us a little bit of insight into the work. So bearing in mind that the large stone base, Davis's letter reads, Start is an optimistic view as opposed to a finish. Man on this planet has made a start, but is still in the early formative stages. Young people in school are preparing to start their adult life. Start, born from an abstract image into steel and high technology, has its start in the earthen organic matter. The masonry, also organic matter, has the metal grow out and up and gives a sound anchor around which benches can be attached for a pause to rest and contemplate. The site is surrounded by trees and grass which are green and change to browns in the winter. Bright colors and glowing metal will always be in contrasting harmony with this site. The sculpture is open, active, and bright, and has to be walked through, and will make a marked change on the site. It is optimistic in keeping with the confidence and self-assurance that educational institutions strive to impart to its graduates. And for us, the older generation, it expresses the confidence in the future that it will all turn out right somehow. As a little PS, he writes, Start resembles the letter A, the start of the alphabet, etc. So we get a rare insight into the observable genesis of this piece. And he doesn't hold too much more after that. But I think that's a really, really nice way of thinking about abstraction. You start with an image, you move away from it and away from it and away from it until you have a piece that's unrecognizable, but is born from a very specific seed. I just want to say, while we're on this piece, that I think that Case did a really good job of removing this piece, not removing it, right? But relocating this piece. I think it still holds its like ideological values. It doesn't really, it's hard. Site-specific pieces, site-specific meaning artwork that need to be in a specific place, right? Site-specific pieces are really hard to move because they're made for that specific site. This piece was made, the artist had in mind, Ford and Bellflower, right? But I think this piece being moved to the opening on a main thoroughfare at the freshman dorms is really intelligent, really informed. And I think it does a good job of preserving the ideas that the piece sought to present. And especially considering Davis was considering the foliage around the area, I think it does really well for itself in this location. My opinion, of course, is not particularly important. If you ever have thank you, Chris. If you ever have a question or anything, just throw in the chat. I'm happy to answer them. But yeah, that is a nice introduction to Start, which is a very, very strong start to our tour. And I think we'll be moving to another piece here called the Spitball by an artist you may have heard of called Tony Smith, if we may.
I'm going to jump in here.
Oh, please. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kathy.
Because I think you've opened up so many different areas of discussion about the campus, about how this collection started and what it is. So I'm just going to jump in for a few points. The Putnam collection was begun by by Peter Putnam and his mother, Mildred Andrews Putnam, and it was eventually named in honor of Peter's parents, John and Mildred Putnam. Originally, it was thought to be more of a sculpture collection, but it always has had the flexibility to include different kinds of art, as photography and painting and prints. Various kinds of design are interesting to us because of Cleveland's really strong design background, especially out of the Cleveland Institute. So we have graphic design also, and industrial design, a couple pieces that reflect that. New media, this is Case Western Reserve University after all, we want to be as up to date, state of the art as we can be with our collection. And there is a committee in place, and I see there's at least one member of the committee who's on the call, which makes me nervous, Jennifer, but not really. And the committee is made up out of experts in the field, experts in contemporary art, some great alums. We have 3 PhDs in art history on our committee. We represent pretty carefully the various important departments at the university, like planning and architecture and development, so that everybody knows what's going on. And always a person from the Cleveland Museum of Art. That was part of the original specification of this. And those people have served nobly over the years. Our role is to commission new art that fits into the campus. Because when this was started in 1980, it's been 40 years now, there were sculptural pieces sort of sprinkled, dotted, carefully planned around the campus, but a number of those have had to move, as you just pointed out. The first one had to move, and some other really important pieces have had to move too. And I see that Meredith's on this call, and she can take a bow for being such a important voice throughout the years for turn to campus, but we'll talk about that also. But that's always been a challenge for us, is that as this campus has grown and beautiful public space that nicely accommodated a work of art needs to be retasked to do something else, we've been able to do that. So I'm going to hand it back to you, JP, but I just wanted to clarify a couple of things about what the committee is and how we operate.
Yes, thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Kathy. Critical context. Here I am leaving my scaffolding out. What was I doing at the Cleveland Museum of Art, leaving that stuff out? Thank you. As I mentioned, we're going to move to an artwork called Spitball by an artist named Tony Smith. For some of us, if you are familiar with abstract expressionism or the art of the 20th century, Tony Smith is perhaps a familiar name to you. It is also, this piece is a really, really familiar piece for anybody who spent time at Case, at Case Western Reserve University. Spitball is a little bit of what I would refer to as a gentle giant. It's one of Smith's earlier monumental works, but Tony Smith's daughters, Kiki and Seton Smith, describe in their book not an object, not a monument, which I think is a really elegant way of describing Tony Smith's work. They say, this is based on one of the earliest exercises with the tetrahedron. And they're quoting Tony Smith, the artist, at this point. I didn't set out to make a large triangular pyramid from a lot of small ones. Looking at the model for another piece, I made some adjustments in my head. The plaster models having disappeared, a new model was prepared from flimsy paper units. This was carried off by the curator at Hartford, probably on the grounds that no model would be needed for executing such a simple piece. Imagine that. I did make another model, but in my haste, left off a whole layer of units. the final product is perhaps too plain to stand for something that has been outlawed, referencing the title Spitball. So Smith was one of the pioneers of minimalist sculpture in the mid 20th century, 1960s, 70s. He treated material and atmosphere as if they were governed by the same forces. I think one of the most impressive aspects of Smith's practice was his ability to fracture and reassemble forms and materials to completely morph the atmosphere around a piece, right? So I think the title of Kiki and Seton Smith, Not an Object, Not a Monument, is so perfect because Smith's pieces strike this perfect balance of they're not an object in the sense that you see them on a podium or on a pedestal in a museum, but they're not a monument in the sense that you think about a public art that would be like in the center of an intersection. They're too small for that, right? They're too small to be a monument, but they're too big to be just like an object. They strike this perfect balance that's very personable, right? They have a very, because of that balance, they're able to strike a really strong relationship with the people around them. And Spitball is absolutely no exception to that. The arch itself is like just too small to be an arch that's comfortable. Like Start is big, like you're not going to bump your head on Start. Many people might bump their head on Spitball, right? It's not meant to be walked through and under because there's not really a path through it anyway. But it's also like too big to just like sit down on. And because of that, it just becomes this like gentle giant. It's the best way that I can think to describe it, that sits in the center of the what's the name of that campus? The Adelbert campus. Oh my goodness, what is happening to me? It sits right in the center of the Adelbert campus. And it's there as if it's like another being almost among the other students who are waiting between classes or killing time or whatever. So sorry, I've lost my place here. Robert Motherwell, a critic, describes Smith uniquely as being able to turn surrounding buildings of whatever order into Hollywood stage sets. He continues to say that the monumental simplicity of Smith's sculpture is the reduction of essences of a complex mind. It's like really complex and dense art historical talk, but I tend to agree with Motherwell here that Smith does a really good job of communicating complex ideas quite simply. Spitball is not a lot to take in visually. It is a black tetrahedron. It is serpentine in one way. It is geometric in another way. It is not super difficult to comprehend when you glance at it, but when you really spend time looking at it, from memory, I don't think that I could draw out a model of Spitball. I don't know what the faces look like from each angle. It's deceptively complex in that way, but it's what draws engagement, right? It's what makes it an interesting piece to engage with. It's what made Tony Smith such a remarkable artist. I think this is a reflection of his abstract expressionist upbringing. Smith had a background in architecture under an architect you may have heard of named Frank Lloyd Wright, which really informed his understanding of space and of people and people's relationship to space and objects in space. It's a critical part of being an architect, and Smith translated that skill into sculpture quite masterfully. I think it reminds me a lot, if you know, in downtown Cleveland, there's an artwork called Portal by Osamu Noguchi outside the Justice Center. I think that piece and this piece, which I'm sorry, I don't have a visual reference for. I really apologize for referencing things I can't be showing you. But like Portal is a piece outside the Justice Center, if you're familiar with, that I think shares a lot of, again, I'm going to use the word again, resonance with Spitball because of its ability to sort of like shift and change as you walk around it, and you forget what you were just looking at as you look away from it and move around it. I don't think there's many abstract expressionists or many artists in general who are able to do that. Smith, of course, I can't harp on enough how important it is to have a Tony Smith work on campus at Case. Like Smith was a drinking buddy of Jackson Pollock, of Mark Rothko. He was Ronald Bladen as well, right? He started as a painter, but he moved into sculpture. And I think that sculpture is the perfect place for him because it lets him, again, marry his upbringing in architecture with a new art form. One of the things that sort of frustrated me or irked me when my time at Case was that a lot of students used Spitball as like a blackboard. And I think it's a really, really tough thing, right? Because you should not draw on the face of artworks. And I say that even though I don't work at a museum anymore, right? You should not draw on the faces of artworks. You should not, even public artworks. But it's pretty unique to this piece that happens. It doesn't happen on the Ronald Bladen piece up by KSL called, I think it's called Lightning Bolt or Lightning Blade. That piece doesn't get drawn on, even though it's also a black geometric sculpture that with flat faces. This piece is so central and its faces are so flat black, right? Students use it to advertise. And certainly I know I'm looking at it when I wrote the script, I was strongly against it. I'm still strongly against the concept of it. But like, as I've gone on, I've thought about it. How does a community engage with an artwork? Does a community engaging with an artwork, the community that this artwork was intended for, does that engagement with an artwork delegitimize the artwork or delegitimize the community or make that relationship fraught? I think it's a really interesting thing to think about. Obviously, I fall pretty strongly in the camp that you shouldn't draw on artworks, but I think it's a really interesting juncture. People have stopped doing it since I originally gave this tour. I talked pretty strongly about how you shouldn't do it. And it hasn't really happened since then, which I'm glad for. I'm really glad for that. I think that Tony Smith is a genius, right? Or I throw that word around quite lightly, right? I think Tony Smith is a really, really incredible artist. And I think this piece is really excellent. But I don't know. It's something to think about, right? How does a community's engagement with an artwork, like how important is that to other art, historical and artistic rules? Technically, this piece is not a Putnam collection piece. It was not acquired by the Putnam collection, but it was gifted or entrusted to the Putnam collection because the Putnam collection knows what they're doing. It was actually bought by Case Institute of Technology in honor of Kent Hale Smith, a former president, right? But it is entrusted to the Putnam collection. I think it's a really, really, really important piece to have on campus. Again, Kathy, do you have anything to share? I'm sorry, like spotlight you like that.
Oh, I think you've done a fantastic job of talking about this piece. It's been interesting to me. We did a piece with the chemical engineering department, and we were talking about, just in conversation about this piece right outside or close to their building, and said, it's just been such a hard task for 20 years to keep people from drawing on it. And campus security has been very helpful in kind of letting people know if their fraternity name is on it, this isn't something you should do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
One of the professors said, "Oh, really? I didn't know that. I thought it was okay to do because you could wash it off." So I think some of it's education and more education.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's tricky. It's outdoor, right? It's outdoor. It's for the community. How do the community engage with it? It's tricky. I'm strongly, obviously I don't think you should draw on artworks, but especially like things as vapid as like a barbecue, right? Like, I don't know. Who am I to pass judgment on these things? But I don't know. It is, regardless of what's drawn or written on it, a really excellent example of abstract expressionist sculpture. And
we're so lucky to have this.
Oh my goodness, are we ever?
That it landed here.
Are we ever? You'll see pieces. Tony Smith has pieces strewn throughout New York City. If you walk just through the right neighborhoods of New York City, you'll see large, monolithic, black Tony Smith sculptures, usually from later in his career. Because I think this piece was made devised in 1971.
It was 61.
61, my bad. Thank you.
Yeah.
So it was pretty early in his career or mid-career, but the ability for the students to engage with and interact with the Tony Smith sculpture every single day is just out of this world. And I feel really lucky to have been able to do that and to have the exposure and ability to research it properly. Really, really impressive stuff.
Well, I think that's a great segue to the next piece, which is another work of art that's kind of slipped onto the campus. If you haven't been walking the campus carefully, you may not realize that we have a George Siegel piece called Homeless, and it was installed right at the front door of MSAS, quite close to where START originally started out. This piece was a donation of the Peter Putnam Foundation to the university. Peter was a great appreciator of the work of George Siegel and commissioned several pieces from Siegel. You may recall that one of the pieces he commissioned was Cain and Abel, which he thought, and the artist thought would be an appropriate way to commemorate the May 4th killings at Kent State. It was not accepted by Kent State. And has moved around and been located elsewhere. But the same kind of thing is true of this piece called Homeless, where you see two figures, one lying down, curled under some kind of a blanket or a sleeping bag, and the other leaning up against under the window. And this piece was offered to Barbara Snyder. And she contacted me and she said, do you think we could take this piece? And we said, well, there's no way we can't take this piece. We have to find a good location for it. And we quickly got to this site outside of MSAS, which is pretty perfect. And there's a label right by the piece that says, homeless. May this sculpture serve as a constant reminder of our responsibility to combat poverty and build a more just world. So some of you who are very in the know about the collection of the Cleveland Museum of Art realize that for many years, one of the most prominently cited pieces, contemporary pieces or modern pieces now in the museum was the piece called The Red Light, which was right as you came up the stairs before everything was moved around. And there's a red truck emerging from the darkness with a red traffic light and a slow sort of plodding figure frozen in the moment in front of it. And it is, very much connected to the way Siegel worked, where he would cast these pieces by casting friends of his in various poses and then building them up out of plaster. And then from the plaster, making a bronze casting of the work. And these are really just, beautiful pieces. And so this is this bronze with a incredible patina. And if you wanted to take shelter somewhere on Case's campus, this might be the place that you would actually go to do that. You're set back, you're by the door. It has a feeling of safeness to it. And I think as Cleve Gilmore and so many people at MSAS have said, this just means the world to them to have something, they have a piece like this out in front and welcoming people, reminding people of what the mission of the school is. So this is something we're just so absolutely stunned to have. George Siegel was born in 1924 and he did this piece in 89. So he was quite a well-established artist at the time. It has been shown all around the world, but it was the kind of a piece that wasn't, gobbled up or taken immediately by museums. I think because the subject matter is very hard. And we're just so lucky that Case Western Reserve was in a position to take it and have a great place for it. So that is our fantastic work, Homeless. And I want to start with now move to another piece that reminds me of what JP said about start, that this is a good start as you begin your college or university career. And the piece that we're going to look at now is in the Tinkham Veal Center, and it's by an artist named Nancy Dwyer, who has a national and international reputation. She was one of the pictures artists who translated their work into graphic design. So what a great person to have in our collection. And this work, do we have the work? Are you guys running to get to the work?
I think Tiana's almost.
Yes, I'm moments of.
Oh my
seconds
goodness!
away.
Am I going too fast for you? You should send me a chat.
she had the longest walk coming from Spitball on this one.
She sure did. I didn't realize it was she going all that way. Well, this piece I don't want to talk about it too much until we can see it, but the Tinkham-Beale Center was dedicated in 2014. And as you know, it's really on this great pathway. It's like where you want to walk through the campus. Its building necessitated the moving of the turning point, which you'll hear more about that. And we really just kind of prayed we would find another good site for the turning point. But if you're coming, for example, from the Peter B. Lewis building in that part of the campus, and you walk in one of the doors, you are greeted by this very dramatic graphic piece. And people are often quite surprised to walk up to it and see that it's not three-dimensional. So contrasting is the graphic of it. I hadn't been on campus for quite a while, other than kind of, scooting through it, but with the purpose of looking at our art collection until early May, when I had the opportunity to take Karen Kaler, the president or the wife of the incoming president, Eric Kaler, on a walk around the campus as they were interviewing for this job and getting to a sense of Case Western Reserve. It was during COVID. And so though they had been on campus, it had been very briefly in the winter. So I was just so lucky to meet her and to get a really great sense of her appreciation of art and design. She's a graphic designer by her profession. We walked in and she was taken back by it. And what you see is the phrase, "What are you waiting for?" That's the title of this piece. What are you waiting for? And we wanted it to be, in a sense, interactive, and I'll talk about that just a bit, but we wanted it to welcome as many students, new faculty, whatever, to the university. And so it is done, it is that phrase translated into the top 12 languages spoken on campus, spoken or written on campus: English, Mandarin, Hindi, Japanese, Korean, French, Arabic, Thai, Persian, Spanish, Turkish, and Hebrew. And we had to enlist various translators in our community that translate for the hospitals, for visitors coming to the hospitals, for a whole raft of academic papers. And then you just held your breath that some tweaking of the graphic wouldn't unintentionally really change the words. And I think we're good. And so the interactive part was that in a very simple way, we had a box in front of the piece with a little format, little form that you could fill in, saying, "What are you waiting for? What are you waiting for?" And the first people that actually saw this piece installed was the band OK Go, who had come here to perform at the opening of the Tink, and they just loved this piece. So they filled out their forms, and the minute they left, we kind of took the tweezers and pulled out their entries to see what it was they said. And one of them said, "I'm happy to be on tour, but what am I waiting for? To go home to my wife and my little kid." And we're like, "Oh, this is terrible." This is really sort of tugs at your heartstrings. But the other things were, from time to time, we'd look to see how is the piece resonating. And people wrote things like, "I don't know what I'm waiting for. I mean, what are my obstacles? What is it that I have to get out of my way for me to realize my potential?" And one person wrote, "I'm standing in here and I'm looking towards the law school and I'm a law student. And why am I a law student? I don't really think I'm meant to be a law student." So, I mean, people had these kind of internal dialogues that you didn't want to feel like you intruded. And of course, we had no idea whose responses were whose, but really kind of an interesting thing to stop and pause and think, I don't know, what am I waiting? So who has to go far on this next one? I'm afraid to do this. Oh, no, she can go quite easily within the Tink.
Yep, and I've actually got a picture that I'll share for you as she's making
okay, all right, great. So also in this crossroads of the campus, which is the University Center, another piece by an artist. In this case, the artist's name is Natalie Lanise, And we saw her work in a marvelous show at the Akron Art Museum. And she does these very, wonderfully pop-up, colorful, vibrant pieces. Her career has been so interesting to watch. And I went up to the label at the Akron Art Museum and I thought, Natalie Linney's, I don't know who this is. Who is she? And then those magic words. She was an alum of Case Western Reserve University. So we thought, well, this is pretty fabulous. And we reached out to her to do this double height wall in the Tink. If you know the building and are around on campus, you know that you catch glimpses of it, but the stairway that you can see on the right, the light wood stairway, blocks it so you can see the top, but you have to come all the way around to see it. We thought this would be a wonderful piece to have students involved in the painting of this mural. And we didn't know how that was going to play on campus. And let me tell you, it played beautifully. We even inadvertently had set the timing of it when there weren't going to be a lot of things happening in that space, when we could get the artists, when students were still in school. But of course, I didn't realize they're all getting ready for their midterms. And we had 20 people sign up right away. And by the time the piece was over, 40 people had worked on this piece. And I laugh because at the very top of it, we were not able to have students up in the scissor lift that went up. That was verboten according to insurance. So we had to get whomever we could get to go up there and paint this. I was a painting major and I don't like heights. And I was up there for about a week doing things. We got some alums. It was okay for alums to go up and do it, to paint, but we weren't able to have the students do it. They could stand on ladders. So I think that if you took a finely calibrated measuring instrument and you measured how thick the paint was at the top and versus how thick the paint was at the bottom, it's probably triple at the bottom. People just kept coming back and painting it, and they'd come back and look at the section that they did and say, oh, this isn't right. Oh, I didn't do that right. And they'd come back and paint and paint and paint. We had students from all across the university, men and women. We had student athletes who were just like, I need this as something that's my creative juices to get out that will be there for a long time. And they're so proud of this piece. And I am too. It was just one of those things that we keep finding ourselves now looking for other places throughout the campus where we could set up such a similar situation and be able to take advantage of that sense of pride, that sense of creativity, that in a certain way you're following what the artist is telling you what to do. But I think for everybody involved, we had so much fun. We did coloring page books that could be filled in with markers that were used at some student activities. We had a cake made at Zagara's grocery store here in Cleveland Heights. And I wish I had my pictures with me right now. The baker came out. She was so proud of her cake that she made to mimic the mural that it was just one of those things that kind of blew through the campus in the nicest way back in 2017. So almost 3.5 years ago.
Kathy, there's a quick question that came in for the chat.
Yeah.
So I don't believe that I've seen it there recently, but is the box for What Are You Waiting For put out occasionally, or
it
I
hasn't
didn't see it
been,
there today.
but
No,
we
okay.
could. We really could. We probably should as school starts up again and we have a whole new group of people coming in. We had some hope that we would find a very clever way to put these answers out there so people would know that their thoughts were, taken into account and that we learned from what they learned from. But that's great. I know where the box is.
Well, you'll have to let me know then, because perhaps we can share some of the answers on the Alumni Association's Facebook page.
Oh, that would be great.
We
That'd be
can
great.
put up the picture and share those from time to time. So we'll have to
that would be
collaborate
wonderful.
on that.
Okay, great. I'm looking at my clock here. Are we near the great picnic?
I think Crystal is headed there now. Just double check with her.
I'm here.
You are. Good.
Oh, I also just want to give a quick thank you to Tiana and Crystal for running around and being so on point with everything. Holy moly.
Yeah.
Just a little couple claps for them. And Chris as well. We'll probably thank you at the end again as well, Chris, but for organizing all of this. It's a pleasure to be back in contact with all these artworks again and to share them with the community who's genuinely interested in them, right? It's such a blessing.
This is an experiment that's working out pretty well, only because of the people on the ground and media vision. But, an important part of the campus, which I think most people don't realize, is that at Uptown, at the new end of the Case Western Reserve University campus, is a wonderful plaza called Toby's Plaza. Most people recognize it as being outside of Mocha, but actually Mocha is in Toby's Plaza, and it is named after an alum, Toby Lewis. It was partially funded by her, and many of the activities that go on Toby's Plaza are due to her donation to make such things happen. So we wanted to have a really, great design. James Corner Field Operations, the designer of the High Line, is the park designer for this plaza. And one important thing was to keep being able to add things that might be a surprise to visitors coming there. So there's some seating in a strip of birch trees, but we realized that wasn't seating that encouraged people to get closer together. So we had a competition. We invited, I think, 4 artists to make proposals about some kind of seating that would seat 100 people. And the person who supplied the winning design is an artist named Mark Riegelman. He's a Clevelander. He's a graduate of the Cleveland Institute of Art in industrial design, and at this point, design of just about everything else. His career has just absolutely blossomed. He just did a project with James Corner Field Operations in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg. It's the Domino Park, and he was the designer of the playground at the same time that he had his first of 2 little girls that he's had recently. But what he wanted to do was to take the kind of geometry that you can see in Mocha to the back and the paving overlay that James Corner Field Operations did, and not do a regular picnic table, but to do a picnic table that used wood from different indigenous woods of Ohio, to make it with a heftiness. There's a steel structure under this. There are umbrellas that we've been challenged with this year because the winds have been so strong that they've been snapping on us. So we're waiting for a new batch of umbrellas. But this is really a place both, all the time and throughout the pandemic that people just love to gather here. You could go almost any time and see groups of people who plan to be there or groups who've just sort of plunked down at different angles. And it is now, 2014. So this is the 7th year for this table. We keep it in pretty good shape and have it refurbished twice a year, and are just pleased that this offers one more place to be at Uptown and at Toby's Plaza, to remind people they're still on the campus of Case Western Reserve. Do we want to, I caught up. Do we want to switch back to Turning Point, or should they just go right over to Judy's hand and then I'll let JP finish?
I just got here to Turning Point, so either way.
We can do whatever. I do want to mention like the Turning Point sculpture from a student's perspective, because again, I started in 2015 and finished in 2019. So the whole time I was there, this artwork was up, and I had friends. I didn't even know that this was a piece from the Putnam collection, and I was studying the dang Putnam collection most of the time. I didn't know, because it's so ingrained in the community aspect of that area, which is, I think, a really, really successful hallmark of an artwork, especially a public artwork, a community artwork, right? To be so ingrained that's not even thought of as an artwork, but just as a feature. When I started talking, when I learned it, I was like, did you guys know? I talked to my friends. I was like, do you guys know that these picnic tables were an artwork? And people were like, no, I didn't. It just looks like tables. I'm like, well, why else would they look like this? And then you kind of stop and think about it for a second, right? And it's like, no, well, they're really kind of a unique design and layout, aren't they?
They are. I think he did a beautiful job. And, to look back 7 years after all the wear and tear and all the people that have had a meal or a meeting there, it's great to see. One of the design constraints was that it couldn't be moved easily. It cannot be moved easily.
Well,
nope,
Kathy,
that's not going anywhere.
do you want to let's do Judy's hand. Let's do Judy's hand now. Let's do
hand.
that while we're there.
Great. Okay. So one other thing, we pondered this for quite some time, and we thought, what else could happen on this site? And one thing you have to know is that there's thermal, what is the right term? Geothermal heating and cooling under this plaza that is what powers MoCA. So every time we'd have a great idea, like, oh, let's do a hammock village or this or that, we couldn't because of the footings, because there's such a infrastructure underneath. So we were kind of restrained in how big we could get. We looked at pavilion projects around the country and around the world where there was a pavilion commissioned as part of a design competition that would provide a gathering point and some shelter. Now this, when we wrote the kind of parameters of the project, this piece is not what I saw coming, believe me. And for this piece, we also learned in 2019, so we started planning a couple of years ahead, that there would be the first art triennial front in Cleveland in the upcoming summer. And they came to talk to us to find out if they could use part of the plaza for one of their pieces for the front exhibit that went from June through mid-September in 2019. So we decided to join forces. The university contributed money through the Putnam collection and through the Toby Lewis Fund for Toby's Plaza. And Front came in with the expertise of their curatorial team, and they recommended maybe 4 to 6 artists. They kept getting down to a shorter list. And the day of the interview, the artist Tony Tassett came in, and he started talking about what a pavilion means to him, what shelter means to him. And he held up his hand, honestly, and he started talking about how your hands visualize concepts that you have. And he was thinking of the funny one of the church and the steeple and the people. That was his kind of reference point. But he put his hand down on the table and he said, I think that we're going to go for the simplest form of shelter as a pavilion, a hand. So our committee all leaned in and said, really, whose hand? He said, I'm not sure yet. I've got to go. Let me get back to you on that one. And then we said, what color? And he said, I don't know about that either. So a little bit later, he came back with a more refined proposal and a model. And the hand he used was his wife's hand. And he said, this is this is in honor of my wife, whom I love, and her hand. She is an artist. She's a painter, Judy Ledgerwood, a fabulous abstract painter. And this is her hand. And they stuck her hand in a bucket of, like a popcorn bucket of, plaster or some similar material, got the mold of her hand, tweaked it around so that the fingers would be in the right splay, and her very characteristic hand. I mean, she's a beautiful woman with hands that look like she's an artist and makes things. And so then he scaled it way, way, way up, and it was cast out of fiberglass with the steel infrastructure inside of it, and moved from suburban Chicago, where the studio was, to Cleveland on 2 flatbed trucks. And that was one of my happiest, funnest moments in this job, was watching these hands come down Euclid Avenue with like a thumb and a finger sticking up in the back of the hand. And of course, our wonderful students are giving the tours to prospective students, and the tour givers were so focused and the followers were so focused, nobody was even looking at these hands. So they stopped at a traffic light and we went, stop, stop, stop. Hey, people, you've got to come look at this. How often is your son or daughter going to have a memorable experience like this, of this hand arriving on campus and then being moved? They closed down the whole intersection of Mayfield and Euclid for the better part of a day, and with openings and closing. It was pretty wild. And then all the pieces had to come together in a rigging that was kind of heart-stopping. I one point left. I thought, I just can't watch it. I'm jinxing it, because they'd get one part in and the other part would swing away. Finally, they got it. They worked all night. They put all the seams together. And he said, I'd really like this to be a silver hand. I think it would be beautiful to be lit from underneath. It'll be beautiful in the sunshine. It's something so elegant and precious. And then, as they're installing, a couple of cyclists came up, very fit young guys, and they were so intrigued with the rigging that they said, oh, this will be a great thing to climb. So they quickly stopped and designed a much heftier top of the hand. The initial cutoff point right at the top was, it closed out the elements, but we never really had the idea that somebody was going to get up and stand up there. Now, I don't know if that's happened since, but we're prepared. So we've seen all kinds of family gatherings. The entire staff of the Cleveland Foundation had a group picture taken here, classes, weddings, graduations, birthdays, everything. Judy's Hand Pavilion. And we've built it as a temporary piece with the artist's approval and concurrence, so that if we did at some point in the future, and probably not while I'm the head of this committee, if we wanted to move it, we could move it elsewhere on the campus, find another site for it, and put something else there in the future. So that flexibility is really important for us, but it is just, I think, a piece that is such a surprise when you come to the Plaza. It makes it feel inhabited even when it's kind of empty there. So.
Kathy, I've got a couple of items for you.
Yeah.
So first, we had a question that came in from Jonathan and Maria Litt. They were asking, they have a book from 2010 of the collection at that time. Is there an updated book since that time?
No, there isn't. And that list, we probably got 10 or 12 pieces that are new. What we want to do is get it online and have it be quite fuller, so that people can go in and get more information about the artist. So we're working on it, but it isn't done. But thank you for asking, and it's important to us too. And so I'm glad to hear that from you.
And actually, I do have a couple of the Daily back in 2018. Ran a few pictures of the hand being installed. If you'd like me to share those.
Oh, I think it would be great.
Okay, yeah, let me pull those.
This was a time, let me tell you.
They're pretty harrowing.
They're kind of harrowing. And there was a harrowing moment, which is at the point I left. And it was all roped off and we had professional riggers and all of that. But, as these two pieces were coming together, there's that sort of sick sound, like a boat hitting a dock, with a fiberglass boat hitting the dock. And it kept making that sound. There's Tony Tassett. Mm-hmm. Who got there after all the rigging was complete. That was a smart move. But his crew knew absolutely what they were doing and just did, I can't say enough about them. They were fantastic. Here's some fingers moving in. And what you can see, the plates on the tips of the fingers, those plates went onto a pattern on the ground. But to get to them, they were able to cut through the nail, remove the nail, fix the plates, make sure they completely lined up, and then put the nails back on. That was a moment.
So it's fascinating. I'm sure it was quite a sight to see this rolling down Euclid there and coming into Toby's Plaza.
Oh, yeah, it was great. One thing that was so moving was that I think day 2, there was a group of adults, of adult men, I think it was like 4 or 5 men and 2 or 3 women came up and stood around it, and they were gesturing. They were so happy. And we kind of like, well, who are they? And, what are they so happy about? As we got closer, we realized it was a group of people who were deaf and signed. And what it meant to them to see this hand just took on a whole different perspective of, the power of a hand to translate across so many cultures and how it means so much to us, from, handmade, hand wrought, give a hand. That this is a piece that you really can just add so many of your own interpretations to.
Well, I mean, and if I can link back to the David Davis sculpture from the very beginning, where he talked about the harmonic language and the visual syntax he used, that sort of scaffolding or that sort of prior knowledge is totally not necessary for this tacit piece, right? Everybody has a hand. Everybody's seen hands. Everybody uses their hands for all sorts of things. And I had the fortune to be able to host a community discussion at this piece after it was installed, shortly after it was installed. And it took place in Mocha, in the lobby of Mocha. We originally wanted to have it all sitting beneath the hand, but it was too rainy. Imagine that, too rainy in Cleveland, right? But we tried to. I guess I wouldn't know. But we hung out in Mocha and we ate ice cream from Mitchell's and talked about the hand and just getting a little gauge on what people thought, because it was interesting. We had people from the art history PhD programs, from the NA programs, from the undergrad programs. We had people who were not at all affiliated with art at all. We had people who were in computer science, music theorists, all sorts of people coming in, talking about what this hand meant to them. And it's just, everybody brings their own experiences about a hand. Some people were like, this pose is so domineering. And I was like, well, it's a shelter, isn't it? There's a little bit of tension there. I don't know. It's a really, really interesting piece. And there's so many different interpretations that can be cast on it and that can be interpreted from it. But I think it's really, really successful certainly as a pavilion piece, as a central outdoor piece, something that just what is its job? Right? You could boil it down to, it draws your eye, it draws your attention, it makes you super fascinated with what's going on, and it makes you stop and look and think about what? Who knows? But it definitely makes you stop and look and think, right?
Yep, I think so. You can't ignore it.
No, not at all. And I love some of my friends took their pictures under it. They took pictures high-fiving it up. There's so many fun ways to engage with it. I think that's one of the reasons that I find it so successful, is because there's so many different ways to work with and engage with a giant hand, and especially for fun and funny ways to do it. I love it.
This piece has been treated with such respect by the community, not only the campus community, but all the people that come there. When it was finished, we said, well, we need to get some of this silver paint for when we're going to have to do repairs. And I don't mean to jinx this, but I've never opened one can of the paint yet. It's really been treated as a special thing. So I think it's because people like it. So I'm done with Judy's hand, and I'm going to bounce it back to you for our wrap up.
Absolutely. And again, as I mentioned, I'm a classroom teacher, and at the Cleveland Museum of Art, I was one of the educators. So my entire professional career since graduating from college is based on discussing art. So if you have any questions, anything you want to share, I love seeing what people think about art. You may not know it, but I don't like hearing the sound of my own voice. I love facilitating discussion. You'd never guess it. So we're going to talk about this piece, Turning Point by Philip Johnson. I've done a little bit of talking about artworks and artists, especially, and giving some insight into the different artists that we have on campus. Again, this is my opinion. I think that the Philip Johnson artwork here is certainly among, but perhaps the most important, but that's a non-descriptive word, artists that we have represented here. And the reason I say that is because Philip Johnson, if you don't know the name, is a Cleveland native. I've got my my Miller High Life Cleveland Low Life shirt on as a little spoof shirt on, right? I'm all Cleveland all the time. You might not know it from me living in Rochester, right? But Philip Johnson is a Cleveland native. And on top of that, he is one of the premier architects of the 20th century, one of the premier American architects of the 20th century, and American architects bar none, right? He's one of the best architects that of the last century. He's responsible for buildings in New York, like the Lipstick Building, the Siegel Building, the Sony Tower, the State Tower. He's responsible for designing the Rothko Chapel in Houston, right? So where Mark Rothko put his pieces up that are meant for contemplative discourse, right? Philip Johnson designed the space where those pieces are held. In Pittsburgh, the objective best part and only good part of the city of Pittsburgh. I'm kidding. I'm saying this. I'm wearing my Cleveland shirt. The PPG Place in Pittsburgh, the huge glass tower with the turrets. That's a Philip Johnson building, right? He pushed modern architecture to soaring new heights. And what's so amazing about having a Philip Johnson sculpture, to me, as someone walks underneath it, perfect timing. Thank you to the random person. Shout out. Couldn't have done it without you. What makes this piece so amazing is that the Turning Point sculpture and the Turning Point Garden, which is nearby in the Tink, between Tink and Mather Dance Studio and Guilford Hall, is that this was Philip Johnson's first foray into pure monumental sculpture. So not architecture, not architectonic sculpture, but pure sculpture. And why is that so remarkable? Well, at the time that Philip Johnson made this, he was a ripe 90 years old, and he had only done architecture and only done anything right like that for his whole career until he was 90, and he made a pure sculpture. And Case has it. Turning Point is a really interesting piece. We started with a piece that was taken from a location and moved to a location, and we end on a piece that has a similar story. Turning Point used to be located over with the Turning Point Garden. It was there before the Turning Point Garden. It was there originally. It was the first piece there. The Turning Point Garden, it was pretty much where Tink is now, right? Where the Tinkerville University Center is now, is where this sculpture you're looking at now, the jagged upright pillars, right? It was right there. And the title Turning Point is referent to that particular location where it was on Case's campus, because that is the location where Case's campus goes from an east-west campus. The spine of the campus is east-west, and it turns to be a north-south campus, right? You have east-west from the north residential village and like where the frat houses and sorority houses are. It's east-west there along Bellflower. That's the name of the street, right? Bellflower, running along.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Again, I didn't know it back then. I still don't know it. I'm guessing Chris knows it. His office is right there. But it turns to be north-south along Adelbert. And so Johnson chose that site really specifically, and he chose the title of that piece really specifically because Turning Point is a really charged title. It's the physical turning point of the campus, but college is also sort of a philosophical, right? Turning point in people's lives where they enter as high schoolers and they exit as professionals in the working world, right? Turning point, as you move through the turning point of the campus, you're reminded of, the turning points in your life and this major junction, right? Again, I can't reiterate how enormous of a privilege it is to have this piece at all. I think it's really interesting because Harvey Buchanan, who I mentioned before, the director of the Putnam collection at the time, he sent a letter to Philip Johnson's home that was like, hey, would you be interested? You're from Cleveland. We're a Cleveland college. Would you be interested in doing a piece for us? And Johnson was very excited. And I quote that in his response letter, very excited at the prospect of doing a sculptural piece for Case. It was something he'd been wanting to do for quite some time. And within 2 weeks, Johnson had returned to Cleveland and he was scoping out sites. He told Buchanan that once he returned to New York City, he was consumed with ideas for the site to the point that he was losing progress on his other projects. And he continued to say that he'd eliminated some ideas, but knew that he was making headway. After a couple more weeks, he presented his final model for Turning Point, which is what you see now, these monolithic jagged pillars that stuck out of the ground and teetered over students. The design was improved and installed and dedicated by 1997. Another another point, right? Another little aspect of turning point is that 1997 is the bicentennial anniversary of the city of Cleveland. So this sculpture was dedicated in 1997, right at the location where turning the campus's spine turns for college students and MA students, right, and PhD students, all experiencing different turning points in their lives. And it was the 25th piece in the Putnam collection. If you're interested, perhaps you're interested, but the Museum of Applied Contemporary Arts in Vienna, Austria, has a copy of this piece called Das Wiener Trio, and it's up there. But they were so interested in having Johnson's piece that they commissioned a copy of it. Now, the original location of this piece obviously was over where Tink is now, near the garden, the sculpture garden with the giant maroon wall and the little white jagged fence and the big beige tower. But it has since been moved and it was put back. What year was it moved, Kathy? What year was it put where it is now?
It was rededicated in 2019.
Okay,
in
yeah.
a location that is not going to change. That was one of the really important conditions for having the piece restored and having it reinstalled. We had to know that this plot of land was not, well, who knows, but was not going to be under consideration for expansion. So it's not on the former CIA site. It's a little, it's closer to the law school, and it's on what is Case Western Reserve, not the joint parcel of Case Western Reserve and the Cleveland Museum of Art.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's still in this turning point, this transitional point between, like, sort of almost a liminal space on campus between the museum, between the law school, between the more undergraduate campus and like Wade Lagoon. It kind of stands in this big open area. Yeah.
I think another way of interpreting it too was it was a site-specific piece for that location and that sort of philosophical situation, and we feel very strongly that it still is a turning point because it is right next to the access that now goes down that wonderful carriage path that is called the Lucia Nash Walkway, which then connects up to the paths that continue as the Greenway across campus and across the front of the Cleveland Museum of Art, opening up the campus to the west, to the Maltz Performing Arts Center, and also philosophically, the move of the health education campus to the clinic site. That it marks that turning point of a complete opening up of the west of University Circle to the neighborhoods and to, just to not have the park confine the limits of the university. And, if we stay with this a little bit longer, the absolutely gorgeous LED lighting that shines on this piece, which is just breathtaking. And the discussions of, what kind of lighting we're going to do, those are pretty interesting because Philip never liked the lighting that initially was installed with the piece. He thought it was clunky, it didn't work, it didn't last. But as we started looking at this rainbow of color that would be possible on the piece due to new fiber optics and new technology, we thought we knew that Philip would love this lighting, and his family members came back for the rededication of it, and they all said, "Oh, Philip would have loved this." So that was, there are things about an artist, and the new was so interesting to him.
I think it's very fitting to have the sculpture so near the Gary building as well, Peter B. Lewis. It's only fitting, right?
Yep.
To mention a question in the chat from Vicky Zaka, where the sculpture on CMA's lawn meant to complement crews or vice versa. Cleveland Museum of Art sculptures on their lawn are totally up to the curators, and they make decisions based on what they want to do. It is pretty fitting or pretty cool, coincidentally, to use that word again, that the CMA has had a Tony Smith out there for so long. because Case obviously has that big Tony Smith we talked about earlier on their Adelbert campus. But no, I mean, as far as I know, Kathy, you can speak to it maybe more, but as far as I know, CMA just does what they're going to do. Like, if you can remember, they had that Anish Kapoor out on the lawn for a long time, that has since moved.
Yeah, I think I think there is collaboration and there is discussion, and it'll be so interesting to see what happens in the coming years to that site where the Cleveland Institute of Art was, which they now call East Bell, because that will be developed jointly with by CMA and CWRU, and so that collaboration, which really has been there for so long. It's evidenced in the joint program, the art history program, that is so important to Case Western Reserve and to the museum to have these world-class art history students studying in both places. So are you all art history students? No.
Well, and I think the fact that that's even a question, right? Are the sculptures at Case's campus a reflection of the CMA's campus or vice versa? Just speaks to it's a testimonial to the quality of the Putnam collection, right? Because how many colleges can claim that they have artworks that can stand alongside the artworks that are publicly displayed on the lawn of a world-class museum in the Cleveland Museum of Art?
Yeah, and I think part of the original intent of Peter Putnam in his discussions with Harvey Buchanan was that he wanted to make the campus more interesting and beautiful, and perhaps it was to have sculpture situated, sort of glue the campus together in the early years after the Confederation of Case Institute and Western Reserve. But he also initially said that all the artists should be from the counties of the Western Reserve. And I take all my cues from what Harvey did. And so for a long time, that was the case. And as it evolved, he expanded it to the state of Ohio, then he expanded it to the region, and then he expanded it to the United States. And we're really happy about that because it allows us to go and find artists that might more represent who the student body is in Case Western Reserve. We're working in new materials and new ways of looking at things. So, whenever we can, we always have a balance of artists who are from the area and the region, and then artists that, whose work has some strong connection to the university. So,
I mean, there's a whole host of sculptors to have chosen from, right? Me and Kathy could be here for 15 hours just talking to each other. You guys would all log off while we talk about the sculptures on Case's campus. So many of them, so many high quality sculptures, so many things to choose from, so many like blockbuster names as well, right? That narrowing it down to 8 or 9 pieces was a task, but again, it's just a testament to the quality of the collection, again, due to Harvey Buchanan, but no less credit is due to Kathy, who's done an incredible job of directing the Putnam collection.
And my great team, great committee, truly. And each person has so much to contribute. We're thrilled to be working with the Department of Art History and Art and Betsy Bowman and her crew, and having new people come into the department has been great. It really has been a unique pleasure of mine to work on this. So thank you, Case Western Reserve.
Yes,
and
yes.
Thank you both so much for your willingness to speak to the alumni and friends that joined us here tonight. JP, Kathy, thank you again so much. This was wonderful. I really enjoyed every piece you talked about, and just wonderful insights into each one.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Chris, for getting this all together, for contacting me. I love hearing from Chris and from the homecoming committee. And also, of course, to Crystal and Tiana, who were
troopers.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Fleet feet running around campus.
We certainly couldn't have done it without them showing us everything that the campus has to offer.
Yep. We look forward to doing this again. And I think the next time we'll try also to do one in person once we can get back on the campus, because there are so many new things to see. And we've got a whole collection that's going to go in the dental clinic across from the Sampson Pavilion of the Health Education Campus. We've got new work going into the Maltz Performing Arts Center Phase 2, which is stunning. People are just going to flip when they get in there. And other projects, we've started doing projects in the residence halls and commons, the commonses, if that's a word. So it's a delight. And I must say to all my friends or former colleagues that are on this call, it's so nice to see you, and thank you for tuning in.
Yes, and we have one coming up here at the Linsalata Alumni Center, where my office is located here behind me. We have a fun one coming up with Bob Madison, graduate of the class of '48 from the architecture school.
Yep.
And that's going to be a wonderful one as well. I can't wait to see that one come to fruition.
Yep, it'll be a great exhibit.
Well, thank you all again. I do want to make sure that I thank Richard Bloom, Dr. Richard Bloom, who is our alumnus there in Rochester, and he is going to be working to connect with the alumni that are in the upstate New York area. Richard, thank you so much for your work with me on this event and helping to put this together. It was really a lot of fun, so I'm glad that we were able to work on this together.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and anyone that would like to stick around, we do have a little bit of time for any alumni that are in the upstate New York area to kind of meet and greet and kind of talk a little bit, as we do have some in-person events coming up. Hopefully not in the too distant future. We'd love to have some additional alumni to work with to help planning some of those fun events. So we'd love to chat with you for a couple of minutes if you're able to stick around. And for those of you who don't, thank you so much for joining. We had a wonderful time tonight, and we look forward to seeing you all on our next event.